only thing that matters is the horn of Valia.
Stand aside. Stand aside.
A heron-marked sword.
Do you truly understand Randolph Thor's strategic genius? When fans of Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time think of the Dragon Reborn, they often picture cataclysmic displays of the One Power. Mountains splitting, skies darkening, Forsaken falling to raw, unbridled strength. It is easy to reduce Rand to a force of nature, a weapon forged by the pattern to fight the Dark One, but this narrow view misses the true depth of his brilliance. Randolph Thor was not just a man with access to unlimited power. He was a tactical savant, a leader who evolved from a reactive farmer to a master strategist whose command of Saidin became his most potent weapon in ways the world rarely saw. The real insights into his growth, the moments that define his legacy as a warrior and a leader, lie not in the epic battles that shake continents. They lie in the lesser-known engagements, the quiet clashes, the subtle weaves that turn the tide of war without fanfare. These are the moments where Rand's true genius shines, where he used Saidin not as a hammer but as a scalpel, where he outthought his enemies, outmaneuvered them, and outstrategized them long before the first blow was struck. Join us as we meticulously break down these often overlooked battles. We'll explore how Rand transformed from a boy who flailed with the One Power to a man who wielded it with precision and purpose. We will dissect the engagements that prove he was more than just a force of nature. He was a student of war, a master of adaptation, and a tactical mind that changed the course of the Wheel of Time. Prepare to see Randolph Thor in a new light, not just as the Dragon Reborn, but as one of the greatest strategists in the history of Exandria. To understand Rand al'Thor's tactical genius, we must begin at the beginning. Not with the legendary hero who faced the Dark One in the last battle, but with the farm boy from Emmons Field who stumbled into a world of channeling danger and destiny. Rand's early encounters with Saidin were not marked by strategy or precision. They were marked by fear, desperation, and raw, unfiltered power. He was a man fighting against a force he did not understand, a power that threatened to consume him even as he used it to survive. His first real engagement with Saidin came in Falme during his confrontation with Ba'alzamon. The battle was chaotic, brutal, and entirely reactive. Rand channeled Saidin with the ferocity of a cornered animal. He lashed out at his enemies, summoning fire and lightning without thought or plan. He did not strategize. He did not adapt. He simply survived. The same was true of his early skirmishes in Kerhin. When he faced off against the Aiel or the forces of the Shadow, he relied on sheer brute force to overwhelm his opponents. He would channel as much Saidin as he could muster. He would destroy everything in his path, and he would move on. These early battles were necessary. They taught Rand how to channel. They taught him how to survive. But they also revealed a critical flaw in his approach. He was using Saidin as a weapon of destruction, not as a tool of strategy. He was fighting like a man who believed that power alone would win the day. But Rand's greatest enemy in these early days was not Ba'alzamon or the Aiel. It was Saidin itself. The male half of the One Power is a corrupting force. It is rage. It is addictive. It fills the channeler's mind with rage and despair. Rand felt this corruption every time he touched Saidin. He felt the darkness creeping in the voices whispering the urge to destroy everything in his path. This psychological burden had a profound impact on his combat decisions. He was afraid to channel for too long, afraid to lose control, afraid to become the monster the world feared he would be. As a result, he relied on quick, decisive bursts of power. He attacked first and asked questions later. He did not have the luxury of subtlety or nuance. He needed to end the fight before Saidin consumed him. But even in these early days, there were glimmers of something more, hints of the tactical genius that would one day define him. One such moment came during his escape from the White Tower. Rand was being hunted by Aes Sedai, who wanted to gentle him to cut him off from the One Power forever. He was outnumbered, outmatched, and on the run. But instead of lashing out with fire and lightning, he did something unexpected. He used Saidin to create a fog, a dense, impenetrable mist that obscured the Aes Sedai's vision and slowed their pursuit. It was a simple weave, a defensive maneuver, but it was intentional. It was strategic. It showed that Rand was capable of thinking beyond brute force. Another glimmer came during his first encounter with the Forsaken Aginor. Aginor was a master of the One Power, a channeler with centuries of experience. Rand was no match for him in raw power, but he was faster, more agile, and more willing to adapt. Instead of facing Aginor head-on, Rand used Saidin to manipulate the environment. He caused the ground to shake. He summoned rocks from the earth to block Aginor's attacks. He used the terrain to his advantage. It was not enough to defeat Aginor, but it was enough to survive. And it was enough to teach Rand a valuable lesson. Power alone is not enough. Strategy, adaptation, intentionality. These are the keys to victory. Over time, Rand began to embrace this lesson. He began to channel Saidin not out of fear or desperation, but out of purpose. he began to plan his attacks, to anticipate his enemy's moves, to use Saidin in ways that maximized its effectiveness without risking his sanity. One of the first real signs of his growth came during the Battle of Kerhian. Rand was facing off against a large force of Shadowspawn. Instead of channeling a massive fireball to destroy them all, he used Saidin to create a series of small, controlled explosions. These explosions targeted the Shadowspawn's leaders. They disrupted their formations. They sowed chaos and confusion. The result was a decisive victory with minimal collateral damage. It was a far cry from his earlier battles. It was a sign of things to come. Rand's tactical mind was beginning to take shape. He was learning to use Saidin not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool of strategy. He was learning to fight smarter, not harder. And he was learning to overcome the psychological burden of Saidin, to channel it with purpose and control. This evolution was not easy. It required discipline. It required practice. It required Rand to confront his fears and his doubts. But it was necessary, because the Dark One's forces were growing stronger. The Forsaken were becoming more cunning, and Rand would need more than brute force to defeat them. He would need tactical genius. As Rand al'Thor's tactical genius evolved, he began to see Saidin not just as a weapon of attack or defense. He began to see it as a strategic lever, a tool that could be used to shape the battlefield, to control the movement of troops, to create tactical advantages that would lead to victory. This shift from individual combat to a broader wargame perspective was one of the most important developments in Rand's growth as a leader. It allowed him to move beyond 1v1 duels and to influence the outcome of entire battles. One of the best examples of this shift comes during the Battle of Dumai's Wells. Rand and his Aiel allies were surrounded by Shaido Aiel and White Cloaks. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. But Rand did not panic. He did not rely on brute force to break through the enemy lines. Instead, he used Saidin to shake the battlefield, to create a series of obstacles that slowed the enemy's advance and funneled them into kill zones. Rand's first move was to channel Saidin to create a massive wall of earth, a barrier that separated the Shaido Aiel from the White Cloaks. This wall not only physically separated the enemy forces, it also sowed confusion and distrust. The Shaido and the White Cloaks had been allies of convenience. They had joined forces to defeat Rand, but with the wall between them, they began to suspect each other. They began to fight among themselves. While the enemy was distracted, Rand used Saidin to create a series of trenches and pitfalls. These obstacles slowed the enemy's advance. They forced them to move in single file. They made them easy targets for the Aiel archers. Rand also used Saidin to manipulate the weather. He summoned a storm, a torrential downpour that turned the ground to mud and made it difficult for the enemy to move. The storm also obscured the enemy's vision. It made it hard for them to coordinate their attacks. It gave Rand and his allies the cover they needed to regroup and counterattack. The result of Rand's subtle battlefield control was a decisive victory. The Shaido and White Cloaks were defeated. Rand and his Aiel allies were freed, and it was all achieved without a single massive display of brute force. It was a victory of strategy, of planning, of subtlety. Another example of Rand's use of Saidin as a strategic lever comes during the Battle of Meridon. Rand was leading the forces of the light against a massive army of Shadowspawn. The odds were stacked against him. The Shadowspawn outnumbered his troops 3-1. They were better armed, better trained, and more ruthless. But Rand did not rely on his troops alone. He used Saidin to create a series of tactical advantages that turned the tide of the battle. First, Rand channeled Saidin to disrupt the enemy's formations. He created earthquakes that split the ground and separated the Shadowspawn into smaller, more manageable groups. He summoned lightning strikes that targeted the enemy's leaders and sowed chaos in their ranks. Next, Rand used Saidin to provide cover for his troops. He created a dense fog that obscured the enemy's vision and allowed his soldiers to advance undetected. He summoned walls of fire that blocked the enemy's path and protected his flanks. Finally, Rand used Saidin to support his troops' movement. He created bridges over rivers and trenches. He cleared paths through forests and mountains. He made it possible for his troops to move quickly and efficiently across the battlefield. The result was a stunning victory. The Shadowspawn army was routed. The forces of the light were victorious, and Rand's use of Saidin as a strategic lever was widely praised. But perhaps the most impressive example of Rand's subtle battlefield control comes during his campaign against the Shan-Shan. The Shan-Shan were a powerful empire with a massive army and a unique weapon, the Adam, a device that allowed them to control channelers. Rand knew that a direct attack on the Shan-Shan would be disastrous. They were too powerful, too well-organized, too ruthless. So Rand used Saidin to wage a war of attrition. He used Saidin to disrupt the Shan-Shan's supply lines. He destroyed their ships. He burned their crops. He made it impossible for them to sustain their army in the Westlands. He also used Saidin to gather intelligence. He channeled Saidin to create scrying weaves that allowed him to monitor the Shan-Shan's movements. He learned their tactics. He identified their weaknesses. He planned his attacks with precision. Finally, Rand used Saidin to create a psychological advantage. He spread rumors among the Shan-Shan troops, rumors of a powerful channeler who could not be controlled, rumors of a Dragon Reborn who would destroy their empire. These rumors sowed fear and doubt in the Shan-Shan ranks. They made the troops hesitant to fight. They made the leaders second-guess their decisions. The result of Rand's campaign was a decisive victory. The Shanshan were forced to retreat from the Westlands. They were forced to negotiate a peace treaty, and Rand's use of Saidin as a strategic lever proved once again that he was a master of war. Rand's evolution from individual combat to a broader wargame perspective was a critical step in his growth as a leader. It allowed him to influence the outcome of entire battles. It allowed him to protect his allies. It allowed him to defeat enemies that were far more powerful than he was. And it solidified his reputation as one of the greatest tactical minds in the history of the Wheel of Time. Rand al'Thor's tactical genius was not limited to the battlefield. It extended to every aspect of his leadership, from gathering intelligence to communicating with his allies, from anticipating enemy movements to understanding complex magical threats. Rand used Saidin in ways that few other channelers could imagine. He used it to master the unseen, to gain an edge over his enemies that no amount of brute force could provide. One of the most important ways Rand used Saidin was for information gathering. In a world where information is power, Rand understood that knowing your enemy's plans is half the battle. So he used Saidin to create scrying weaves, complex spells that allowed him to see events from afar, to monitor the movements of the Forsaken, to track the armies of the Shadow. Rand's scrying weaves were not just simple visions. They were detailed. They were precise. They allowed him to see not just what his enemies were doing, but why they were doing it. He could watch their strategy meetings. He could listen to their conversations. He could anticipate their next moves. One example of this comes during his campaign against the Forsaken Samael. Samael had seized control of Ilion. He had built a massive army. He was planning to launch an attack on Rand's forces. But Rand used Saidin to scry on Samael. He watched as Samael trained his troops. He listened as he planned his attack. He learned about his weaknesses and his strengths. Armed with this information, Rand was able to prepare a counterattack. He positioned his troops in strategic locations. He set traps for Samael's army. He used Saidin to create obstacles that would slow their advance. When Samael finally launched his attack, he found Rand's forces waiting for him. The result was a decisive victory. Samael's army was defeated. He was forced to flee Ilion, and Rand's use of Saidin for information gathering played a critical role in the victory. Rand also used Saidin for surveillance. He would channel Saidin to create invisible eyes and ears, spies that could infiltrate enemy camps, that could listen to private conversations, that could report back to him in real time. These surveillance weaves were invaluable. They allowed Rand to stay one step ahead of his enemies. They allowed him to respond to threats before they materialized. They allowed him to make informed decisions that saved lives and won battles. Another important use of Saidin for Rand was communication. In a world where armies are spread across vast distances, where allies are scattered across continents, where messages can be intercepted or delayed, communication is essential. Rand used Saidin to create a network of communication weaves, spells that allowed him to speak to his allies from afar, to send messages instantly, to coordinate attacks and defenses. These communication weaves were not just simple voice messages. They were secure. They were encrypted. They could not be intercepted by the enemy. Rand could speak to his generals, his advisors, his allies. He could give orders. He could receive updates. He could make decisions on the fly. One example of this comes during the last battle. Rand's forces were spread across multiple battlefronts. They were facing the full might of the Dark One's army. But Rand used Saidin to coordinate their efforts. He spoke to his generals. He gave them orders. He adjusted their strategies based on real-time information. He ensured that every unit was in the right place at the right time, that every attack was coordinated, that every defense was strong. The result was a unified effort, coordinated attack that overwhelmed the Dark One's forces. And Rand's use of Saidin for communication was a critical factor in the victory. Rand also used Saidin to anticipate enemy movements and understand complex magical threats. He would channel Saidin to analyze the one power residues left by his enemies. He could identify which Forsaken had been in a location, what weaves they had used, what their intentions were. This ability to analyze magical threats allowed Rand to prepare countermeasures, to create weaves that would neutralize his enemy's powers, to protect his allies from harm. One example of this comes during his confrontation with the Forsaken Mezana. Mezana was a master of illusions, a channeler who could create realistic visions that could trick even the most experienced channelers. But Rand used Saidin to analyze Mezana's weaves. He could see through her illusions. He could identify the source of her power. He could create weaves that would counter her magic. When Rand finally confronted Mezana, he was not fooled by her illusions. He saw her for who she was. He used Saidin to create a weave that disrupted her connection to the One Power. He neutralized her threat, and he moved on. Over time, Rand developed a unique Saidin signature in these subtle applications, a pattern of weaves that was known only to his closest allies. This signature allowed his allies to identify his weaves, to trust his information, to work with him seamlessly. It was a mark of his mastery, a sign that he had evolved from a simple channeler to a true leader. Rand's use of Saidin for leadership and intel was a critical part of his tactical genius. It allowed him to gather information, to communicate with his allies, to anticipate enemy movements, to understand complex magical threats. It allowed him to master the unseen, to gain an edge over his enemies that no amount of brute force could provide, and it solidified his reputation as one of the greatest leaders in the history of the Wheel of Time. Rand al'Thor's journey as a tactical genius came to its culmination in the last battle, the final showdown against the Dark One, the battle that would decide the fate of the world. It was here that Rand's years of growth, his mastery of Saidin, his strategic brilliance, all came together. It was here that he cemented his legacy as one of the greatest tactical minds in the history of the Wheel of Time. But to truly appreciate Rand's enduring genius, we must look beyond the last battle. We must look at the underrated Saidin engagements that defined his evolution, the moments that showed he was more than just a force of nature. He was a student of war, a master of adaptation, a leader who used Saidin with precision and purpose. One of the most underrated engagements that exemplifies Rand's tactical evolution is his confrontation with the Forsaken Bailal. Bailal was a former general, a master of strategy, a channeler who preferred to fight with his mind rather than his power. When Rand confronted Bailal in the Stone of Tear, he knew that a direct attack would be suicidal. Bailal was too powerful, too well prepared, too cunning. So Rand used Saidin to manipulate the environment. He channeled Saidin to create a series of earthquakes that shook the Stone of Tear. He caused the walls to crumble, the ceilings to collapse. He turned Balal's own stronghold against him, but Rand did not stop there. He used Saidin to create illusions, to make Bailal see things that were not there, to make him doubt his own senses. Bailal was confused, disoriented, unable to tell what was real and what was not. And in that moment of weakness, Rand struck. He channeled a precise weave of Saidin that pierced Bailal's defenses and killed him instantly. It was a brilliant tactical move. It was a victory of strategy over brute force. Another underrated engagement is Rand's battle against the Forsaken Asmodean. Asmodean was a former bard, a channeler who used music and magic to manipulate his enemies. When Rand confronted Asmodean, he knew that he could not defeat him with brute force. Asmodean was too fast, too skilled, too willing to flee. So Rand used Saidin to create a trap. He channeled Saidin to create a field of energy that blocked Asmodean's escape. He forced him to fight. But Rand did not attack Asmodean directly. He used Saidin to disrupt his weaves, to make his music lose its power, to neutralize his magic. Asmodean was frustrated, impatient. He made a mistake, and in that moment Rand struck. He channeled a weave that cut Asmodean off from the one power. He did not kill him. He did not torture him. He simply neutralized his threat. It was a masterclass in tactical thinking. It was a victory of patience over rage. These underrated engagements, these subtle weaves, these moments of strategic brilliance, they are the true measure of Rand's genius. They show how he evolved from a farm boy who flailed with Saidin to a man who wielded it with precision and purpose. They show how he learned to adapt to unexpected opponents, to use Saidin as a strategic lever, to master the unseen, and they ultimately contributed to his overall success in the last battle. In the final showdown against the Dark One, Rand used all of his tactical skills. He used Saidin to gather intelligence, to communicate with his allies, to shape the battlefield, to neutralize the Dark One's forces. He used Saidin to create a barrier that protected the world from the Dark One's corruption. He used Saidin to channel the power of the pattern itself, to seal the Dark One away for another age. It was a victory of strategy, of planning, of subtlety. It was a victory that could not have been achieved with brute force alone. Rand's legacy as a tactical genius endures long after the last battle. His subtle weaves, his strategic thinking, his ability to adapt to unexpected opponents. These are the lessons that future generations of channelers and leaders will learn from. They are the lessons that will help protect the world from the Dark One for centuries to come. But Rand's legacy is not just about his tactical skills. It is about his growth as a person. It is about his ability to overcome his fears, his doubts, his inner demons. It is about his willingness to learn, to adapt, to become better. It is about his understanding that true power comes not from brute force, but from intelligence, from strategy, from the ability to see the unseen. As we reflect on Rand al'Thor's journey, we are left with a simple question. What other overlooked tactical Saidin moments have we missed? What other engagements? What other weaves? What other moments of strategic brilliance have gone unnoticed? We encourage you to share your thoughts, to join the conversation, to help us uncover the full extent of Rand's enduring Saidin genius, because Rand al'Thor was more than just the Dragon Reborn. He was a tactical savant, a leader, a hero, and his legacy will continue to inspire and amaze us for generations to come.